Welcome to the Expert's Journey podcast, where we're all about creating your path to impact. Join your hosts, Dixie Mary Carlton from Indie Expert Publishing and Mr. Web Marketing Brad Houck, as we look at how you can grow your business and influence by leveraging your knowledge for profit. Welcome to the Expert's Journey podcast. In this episode, we're talking about how aligning your brand across everything helps you position yourself as a trusted authority. From your logo to your tone of voice and even your daily habits, everything should send a consistent message about who you are and what you stand for. We share some real-world tips and some examples to help build a stronger recognition of your brand and trust in your space. So good morning, Dixie.
Good morning, Brad. How are you going today?
Good. So where in the world are you today?
I am sitting in sunny Hanoi in Vietnam. Yes, somewhat vacationing, but a little bit of work on the side, as usual.
Okay, so you're getting a chance to travel and speak and have a holiday and do your work and all sorts of things.
All those things joined together makes life a very interesting lifestyle and work style. But you know, Brad,
Absolutely.
this actually reminds me of the fact that, we're talking about brand and aligning values and aligning our brand and being consistent. People are starting to know that I am very untethered in my work. I talk and speak the same things about the same topics, but most people are starting to realize the first question is usually, well, where are you today, Dixie? So yes, it is rapidly becoming a part of my brand that I'm very globally oriented. And that leads us nicely into some of the questions that I know you've got there lined up for our conversation today.
Yeah, absolutely. And look, I mean, your brand is who you are, I think. A lot of people think a brand is the business, and that is part of it. But I also think that your brand is about everything that you are coming through in your business.
Absolutely.
Certainly when we were talking about speakers and solopreneurs and authors, So Dixie, we're talking about building a brand and making sure that it positions ourselves properly by aligning everything that we're doing, saying, writing, pushing out, etc. And I suppose the first question I really like to look at is why looking and sounding the same everywhere helps people to trust you. What do you think about that one?
Oh, don't get me started. This is one of my favorite subjects. We could be here all day. Okay. I wrote a book a few years ago called Advertising, Marketing and Branding 101. And I deep dived into that very, very heavily about the concept of your brand is not your logo. Your brand is the intangibles as well as all of the visible things about what you do, how you speak, what you say, what you represent. And ideally, you want to start with understanding what your brand values are before you even start with your marketing and strategy planning. So if your brand values, for example, are, let's say, freedom or helpfulness or knowledge, then you might want to align those sort of concepts with even colors or attitudes, things that make people feel very instantly connected to what your brand value is all about. So if you, for example, like one of my brand values for my company is flexibility, and flexibility comes from a personal brand value of freedom. So I try to make sure that anything that we do, all of the messaging that we convey is flexibility. Flexibility in our programs, how we approach every client as a new person, all of the things that make it fairly clear and obvious that we will live, stand and die by that particular sword. So whatever your particular brand values are all about, that's what you need to be conveying. So we have some, for example, some friends that you and I both know where their brand is, one person, let's talk about Jo Hassan. Her brand is all about being positive and being upbeat and making sure that you deliver on the best version of yourself you can be. She wears pink. So everything about Jo is pink. We call her Miss Pinkwise. So she espouses everything about that whole bring your best game, be your best version of yourself, and have a great time doing it. And when she's talking, she's upbeat, she's friendly, she's enthusiastic to the max about everything that she's conveying within her brand set. Other people that we know will consistently wear interesting shoes and shirts to match their appearance and what they're doing to convey a sense of style. There are so many ways that you can identify, one, what your brand is first, and then what you want people to understand about your brand. So I think that's the first point. You've got to understand who you are and where that aligns with your brand. Then marketing
Yes.
strategy and planning that you want to. You've got to start there.
Yeah, look, it's a really interesting conversation that you can have with yourself or with ChatGPT, like I do sometimes. What is it that your brand stands for when you really look at it? And for me, personally, it's all about trust. In my case with web marketing and that, there's so many charlatans online that being able to trust me is really, really important. That what I say is actually quality information, and I think that's kind of a big one for me. And I know that as you build on that brand, obviously you've got the underlying layer of trust or whatever that is for you. But then you kind of move up to the bit about, what do I do? How do I help people? And trying to narrow that down. And I've been going through that a bit myself over the last couple of months of kind of really narrowing down what I do. And, as we've discussed previously, my two words now are optimize and accelerate. And that's what I do with businesses. I help them optimize their digital marketing and accelerate it through strategy and AI tools. And that's kind of build one on top of the other. And then you can start to add, well, I need a name and I need colors and I need a logo. But I think it's very much these layers that you have to build a brand rather than just saying, oh, we need a great logo and we need a great slogan. I just don't think it's that simple.
It definitely is not. And you do a brilliant job of making sure that people understand the connection between your work, your firefighting, your delivery on things that are trustworthy, because, you've got to trust your firefighters to carry you out of the burning building, right? So there is an innate level of trust that is indicated because you align with the firefighting brand. You also do things like use the right words, the consistency that you talk about everything with the same level of consistency about topics. You use similar wording to make sure that people aren't confused. There's nothing confusing about what you stand for when you stand in front of a room and start talking about what you do. And, we both know many speakers who have gone through this massive journey, many years in the making often, of this is what I'm here to stand and tell you about. This is what gives me the right to discuss this with you. This is my history. Now here's my wisdom. And how I've conveying my wisdom is a consistent line of brand, message, being clear about why I'm here, all of those things, and looking the part. It's all tied up together.
Absolutely.
It's a journey.
Yeah, I think that's it too. Looking the part is a good one. I know, as you said, different people have their different brands and their different looks that they have. And I think some people get it really right and it works really well for them. And other people, it's like their personality has overtaken their business almost.
Yeah.
And I think trying to get that balance right is where sometimes it's really good to talk to other people who are in your industry, who are speakers or are sitting in the audience, and kind of get a feel for how they see you and getting a little bit of feedback on that. I mean, not all feedback's good, as we well know, but it doesn't hurt just to kind of go, well, actually, you talk about this and you come across, you're an accountant, say, accountants are heavy and they're strong. And yet I know accountants that are flashy and fun, and I know other ones that are very casual. So, trying to find the right balance between your content to carry the message to the audience and the look that you are and how people perceive that look. I was talking with a client of mine who's an accountant, and, he'll generally wear a polo shirt around the office, but if he goes to meetings at a business or a corporation, he'll wear a suit, but he won't wear a tie, depending on which company he's going to, and things like that. And getting the look right for the situation, because, I wear t-shirts 99% of my life, realistically. But to show up on stage in a t-shirt, to me, is kind of incongruent with who I am. Even though people say to me, well, you're a tech guy, you should be wearing a t-shirt on stage. I can't do it. I'd like to.
Yes.
But I can't. So I think, there's a real balance to be had there.
And it's something that you have to work on. You have to consistently decide, this is what I'm going to do. I am going to spend this year, for example, developing my brand, getting clear on it, maybe seeing a stylist or a brand consultant, and really rolling it out in a way that makes sense to everybody. Because as soon as you don't make sense with your branding, people will just, whether they even realize it or not, they'll just shy away and they're gone. And they often won't come back if they've in any way reached a point where they don't trust your brand. So it can have quite big repercussions if you don't get it right. So you do have to plan it methodically and very, very well.
Yeah, and it brings us to that question, how do mixed messages in your brand confuse people and cost you business? And I suppose it does follow on from what we've just been saying, that the mixed message thing can be hard to kind of tie the two things together. Sometimes I'll see someone on stage and they'll be doing this speech about a particular topic and they're all dressed up and, portraying this image. And I'm kind of like, well, I get the dress up part, but I don't get how it really ties into this. You could tell it's almost like they've created a character that they play on stage, but it doesn't really tie into the message. The message could be told anyway, and it would still be just as powerful.
Yes.
And sometimes I find people do this where they go too far down one route rather than going, actually, do I need all these flashy things or do I just need to tell my stories? Do I just need to practice my stagecraft more?
Well, often that's a really great point. Often we do need to just practice our stagecraft better, but we also need to think about, from the minute we step off the stage, are we consistently staying in brand for the amount of time that we need to be? Or even in the corridors of the conference that you're attending, are you still maintaining that same level of brand quality, attentiveness the next day when you're still seeing people who may have seen you on stage? You still need to be thinking about the on-brand, off-brand, on-stage, off-stage pieces that you bring to who you are.
Yeah, that performance side of it. I saw it recently and the person was dressed up as a character and they were on stage and they did their bit and it was awesome and all those sorts of things. But then I literally saw the same person 10 minutes later and they were just dressed in normal clothes. And I'm like, hang on, aren't you that person? And it's like, well, no, this is who I am. So there's that confusion in my mind. Like, well, say you're a character on stage. It's like, it's not a play. I get it. It's part of getting the message across. I understand why people go there, but I just feel it's kind of weird that, they dress up and then they're back to themselves.
Yeah. And that's not branding.
But that's just,
to me, that's not branding. That's playing a part. Branding is something that still follows you, as I said before. It's an intangible part of what you do and who you are perceived to be. And if you're going to be fully authentic as a branded identity with a message, then you need to be thinking about, how does this convey? Even if I ran into a customer at the supermarket, am I walking around sort of slouching, no makeup, hair undone, but appearing, expecting to be seen as glamorous and interesting? Well, at least be glamorous or less glamorous and less interesting, perhaps, when you run into someone at the supermarket, but still be able to be identified. Like Jo Hassan we were talking about before, she does her marathon runs and her fun park runs in pink. There's no misidentity there. And be someone that is wanting to be at any level in the public eye, then you have a responsibility towards your own branding to be consistent even when you are miles away from a stage, because you never know who you're going to impact on.
Yeah, I think that's the key thing. As I said, I understand why people do these things. I understand it's part of their business. But I just think sometimes they need to look at it and go, is this really, working as well as it could be for me? And in some cases, I'm sure it is, but, it's personal opinion. Again, you've got personalities in play and, my personality is such that, I find that uncomfortable. So, well, it's not for me, it might be for someone else. So, well, let's look at some easy ways to get our websites, socials and content all saying the same thing, because I just worked with a client on this sort of thing. And I think this is really important. A lot of people get confused trying to bring things together. And there's some really good shortcuts that you can create.
Yeah, definitely. Well, you've got to start with colors, fonts, and size and imaging can say a lot about your brand. You've got to be thinking about whether something looks like it's all flowing through, like it's all come from the same stable. You don't want to mix things up so much that it's just confusing and garish. You want to be thinking about if you're going to be using metaphors, for example, as part of your brand, then how do you convey that? So, for example, I use the journey concept a lot in what I'm talking about. So I'll bring in things like, backpacks and the compass, or talk about, navigating. So things that
Mm.
enhance the way you speak about something is also part of your branding. Uh, Finding the right metaphor can be quite difficult. Some people use things like a racetrack, or, you're driving in a car, or, if shooting for the moon or shooting for the stars. So therefore they'll use some kind of, cosmic sort of elements to their branding. Sailing, setting your sails right. Therefore, do you want to use blues and nautical themes? So I think sometimes your
Mm.
metaphors and the way you speak and the way you enhance what you're speaking about can also play a part of your brand. So work those parts out first. Your colors, your fonts, your imagery, and your metaphors.
Yeah, and then you look at the layouts and your consistency across your brand. And one of the things I see is obviously people have a website and it hasn't been updated in years. So that's one definitely where I like to talk to people and get their website updated to actually match their brand, bring it up into a more modern style for number one. The second thing that I see that is really common is their social media is all over the place. And I understand how this happens because you want to create a social media post. You might do the style where you take a photo of yourself and you write something. That's great. But then you've got the other ones that you create in places like Canva. But when you go to Canva, you find a nice design and you design up a post and you post it. Then the next time you go back to design up a new post, you don't want the same post. So you look for a new design. But Canva doesn't really do set. And that's an issue. So you've got one design and then another design, and they're not the same. They're not the same fonts. They're not the same shapes, for example. So instead of having all squares, you've got rectangles and triangles or something like that. So you start to get this difference between the brands, and then the colors aren't the same. Yeah. And so one of the things that I've found that's really good is you can actually buy sets of Canva social media posts already pre-made. And you can find those on Etsy if anyone wants to go and have a look. And they're basically a set of 50 posts. But if you look at the ones, there's some that are kind of cheap and done by an average designer. And then there's some sets that are really high quality. And you buy them, you get 50 posts all designed, all little squares or verticals or whatever, you choose. And then you open those up in Canva. And when you open them in Canva, they're like one string of files. And you can go in and change the colors. So even though it might be orange in the original, you go in and choose it, make pink, and then you say apply to all, and it changes all of the 50 of them to make them all pink in your color pink. But the key thing that happens here is you've got the same font, you've got the same layouts, you've got the same, colors and all that. Now you might swap your own photos in. You change the wording, of course, to match your brand and all that. But if you don't change the font, don't change the layouts and all that, you end up with this consistent looking social media posting, I suppose posts, probably the best, that, consistently over time as you post them, people see that consistency and layout and style. And as soon as they see it, they know straight away it's from you because it's got your brand colors. It always uses the same font, always uses this kind of nice layout. And you would not believe the difference it makes in the look of your post. It blew me away the first time I did it with some stuff for firefighting. And it took me 10 minutes to customize 50 of them. It was all done in Canva, so it was really easy. And I exported them all, and then I just used them one by one.
Well, I think, you make a great point. Canva is a brilliant tool for getting that consistency. You can also just use templates in anything that you're doing. So whether you're using a template for your wardrobe even, if you've got things templated, life is considerably easier because you're not reinventing all the time. You've already spent some time working out what the template looks like. And, working with a really good stylist or a good brand specialist right at the beginning helps you to identify all the areas where you need to have that consistency. So, for example, as you said, using the right fonts, using the same images, the same shapes. Are you going to be someone who uses flowing designs or hard edged designs? Are you going to be bold and brash, or are you going to be soft and subtle? All of those things need to be thought about as part of an entire brand plan. And you can go a long way with it, and it's something that you can have a lot of fun with. And when you've got that alignment, then it's consistently good fun to continue to develop and work with, and, play around a little bit, be fun. Don't get hung up on whether or not you're being, too sergeant major-ish about it, but make sure that you have some firm brand plans for yourself, well mapped out ahead of time.
Yeah, I think when I looked at it once, I really thought hard about this. And templating to me is really powerful. I really like that word. You're right. And it's what it's all about. I think when you start to template things, it becomes much easier to actually produce things. And if you look at any big brand, they use templating now. Woolworths will use the same colors across everything. Coles would use the same colors across everything. McDonald's would never stray from yellow and red. And yet in businesses, we jump back and forth between colors, but that templating can go to so many things. For example, my two latest books, Microcourse Profits and now AI Powered Profits. I've got the profits in the name. That's templating in itself and styling them as a group of books. You can template so much stuff throughout your business so that when people open it straight away, they recognize that it's yours. And I see some speakers who do this exceptionally well. And as soon as they pick up their stuff, you just know it's theirs without even reading the name on it. Because
Him is a great example.
Sorry?
Keith Abraham, perfect example.
Oh, yeah. He's a perfect example of it. He's had a team for a long time that did that for him. And he's stuck with it and it works for him.
Yeah, it really does. And, that's the difference. When you get all of these things really well sorted, you can go a long way with it. But when you stop and start and you change every few years and make big changes and you haven't really thought it through, then you end up with that brand inconsistency that just confuses people. And that's where it just doesn't work. So, yeah, you do need to spend a lot of time thinking it through, getting some plans in place, maybe talking to some experts and templating as much as you can.
Absolutely. So any quick ideas on ways to check if your brand's kind of still matching where you're heading? Any thoughts on that one?
Oh, well, I have a couple of really good checklists that I use in a couple of my books, particularly the Advertising, Branding and Marketing 101. But I do tend to sit down and work through a lot of question and answers. How does the color, the font, the brand values, all of those things align? And it's really, to be honest, quick answers to that one, probably not quite so consistent with my branding.
Yeah, I think for me, many years ago, I had a very great mentor when I first started my original SEO business. And opportunities were coming up left and right, and I had to decide whether these were the right opportunities for me. And this applies to branding as well. And that was that I didn't know whether to take this one or take this one. Should I do this or should I do that? And, when we're doing things with our brand, it was like, well, should I make it look like this or should I make it look like that? He used the story of the lighthouse, and that was a boat is sailing towards a lighthouse. That's the goal. That's where you're headed. And you can't sail directly to a lighthouse because of the wind. So you've got to tack. So you go left, and then when the wind changes, you tack right, and you're slowly making your way back and forth. But the key thing is that you're keeping your eye on the lighthouse. So the real answer to the question was, as long as you can see your goal, make your decision based on that goal that you're heading in the that you're heading in the right direction. And that was always really useful to me. And I think that's the key thing. We always talk about goals and working out what it is you want and all that, but that's key as well, even here, because of the positioning angle. But you've got to be looking at, how do you want to be seen? How do you want the world to perceive you? Right now, you're a mess, but in 5 years' time, where's your brand going to be? Do you want it to be this way or do you want it to be that way? Well, choose that way, but keep your eye on where you're going and work out which decision is the right one to put you there.
I think that's absolutely brilliant and a great metaphor with the lighthouse. But like with sailing anywhere, you don't set sail without a good plan. And the best advice I can give anyone is to understand that this takes planning. And in the famous words of Keith Abraham, you can't go there till you grow there. A brand is often something that you have to do. You can't just make it happen overnight.
No, you can only set where you want to be.
Absolutely.
Excellent. Well, Thanks again for joining us on the Expert's Journey podcast. If you learned something useful in this episode, please take a second to subscribe, share it with a fellow expert, and leave a quick review. It really helps us reach more people. And don't forget to check out our latest books on Amazon, Dixie's Start with the Draft, How to Easily Plan and Write a Non-Fiction Book, and My AI-Powered Profits. Use AI to automate and accelerate your business in 90 days. Both are packed with tools to help you grow your audience, and we'll catch you in the next episode.
Thanks, Brad. Great to see you.